Emmanuel Hébertot, good morning. Cosmos. Two questions on the future. As for the FCAS, what will be the key technologies for the MGAF? And as for the combat drones, do you expect to market an operational UCAV in the future in continuity with the Neuron? For the MGAF, this is the beginning. So it's important to analyze our operational needs first. That is the work of the chiefs of staff on each side of the Rhine River. What we observe when we look more closely at what's happening all around the world is that there are progress made in the solar system, especially the Russian systems, and there's the will from a certain number of countries to ban their territories by strengthening this defense. So that's the first point. We'll have to have a better performance to go through the enemy defenses, the solar defenses. And all around the world, we see that some countries are putting money in the development of combat air fighters. And the one that will have the air superiority will be able to carry out raids to be able to deal with certain objectives. So air superiority, which is often dominated by the Americans, they have the number of aircraft, they have specialized aircraft, etc. And in a certain number of countries, it is the development priorities. Not to name them, the Russians and the Chinese are continuing their efforts to develop air combat aircraft. So this threat is an important threat when you want to dominate the sky. So in terms of technology, maneuverability will remain important. The capacity, we should be able to take enough load, and we should be able to win also. And it won't be the case if you are seen immediately by the radars. So stealth that we've set up in the framework of the drone Neuron will be useful in the future. Connectivity, the connectivity architectures, because the aircraft doesn't work on its own. You need several aircraft. It can work with drones. It can work with information that is acquired by surveillance drones acquired by all kinds of means. So connectivity will also be a central point. So these are some of the technologies we're working on. We are already, with the Neuron, working on stealth. With the Rafale F4, we'll be working on connectivity with new connectivity architectures. And so therefore, it is these technologies that we will have to develop. You've seen the silhouette of the aircraft. It's an aircraft that will be potentially larger than the Rafale, so that it can have a better range. And all this, if I've properly understood the operational teams, all this will be able to land on an aircraft carrier. So these are our ambitions. We have some very strong ambitions, and this is why we are going to develop a demonstrator, because before having a full development, it will be interesting to see how technology can be implemented in a concrete way. For aircraft company, that is very important. The second point, the combat drones. For the moment, the chiefs of staff have decided to have an aircraft with a pilot. But of course, we'll be working with 5 other European partners on the Neuron. We've worked with the British on a UCAV demonstrator, and it didn't lead to any full development contracts, but we're ready. The Neuron is flying, and we're ready to provide our know-how in the field of unmanned aircraft. And you know that there is a brick called the small drones that would fly around the aircraft, the fighter aircraft, which are developed by Airbus, and we're also studying that possibility.
Thierry Dubois from Aviation Week. A question on the acquisition of the maintenance activities of ExecuJet and TAG. Could you tell us a bit more about that strategy? Are you going to make another such acquisition? And what would be the amount of the investment already made in those two acquisitions, please? Well, we won't publish the amount of those acquisitions. They're not huge deals either. It's not billions. But secondly, our strategy is to be able to have a global footprint for service centres. And service centres are places where you entrust your airplane for maintenance and so on to people who will take care of it. And we'd like to set up a label and say it's wholly owned by us. It's our teams integrated with the teams of the companies we purchase to be certain that we offer quality of service vis-à-vis our customers, and especially to have an operational network around the world, a worldwide network. Airplanes are made to fly, so they fly all over the world, and clients can be in different parts of the world. So vis-à-vis them, we would like to provide them with direct support on the spot, wherever they may be, so as to provide all of the requisite service around the world to clients who may need to service their aircraft, a service of our own. So you've seen the map. We are moving towards Asia quite a lot. ExecuJet has given us possibilities there. We've bolstered our efforts in Europe thanks to TAG. And we're on the boat, so that's why it's moving, he's saying, don't worry. And so we've been, strengthening our support teams too. This is part and parcel of our ongoing efforts to increase the quality of service we provide and the perception of customers too in that regard. And also it's part and parcel of our intent to improve the support of the 2,300 Falcon jets flying around the world. Question without a microphone, sorry.
Michel
Poleco, independent. Two questions. The first, the F1 Mirages reformed by the Air Army. I mean, do you know what's going to happen to them? And the second question, the future of Falcons. Can you say a little more about them? Will you extend the range towards the bottom because you've totally disappeared from the middle or lower range? Well, as for the very old aircraft, we are dealing with the future clients. We're taking care of our current clients. Once the aircraft was removed from service from these armies, well, it is not our job anymore. We contribute to recycling chains to recycle these aircraft. We can recycle them. I'm not a great fan of selling aircraft that are already quite old to private companies that will use them. I've already said that that was not our job, and our responsibility as an aviation company cannot be in that type of activity. And combat aircraft is for military reasons that it exists, and we can't use it for something else. It's made for combat and not to transport passengers. I know that some companies have squadron aggressors, as we call them. They use that in the United States. They do it under their own responsibility, and we're not engaged in this type of operation. Now, for the Falcon range, we've decided since a long time now that the lower range would be 4,000 nautical miles. So that would be the Falcon 2000X. It will be slightly less with the Falcon 2000X, so 3,300 nautical miles. But that is where we have our entry range for Dassault Aviation. Underneath is not really our domain. It was in the past with the Falcon 10 and 20. I'm not saying that we cannot make an aircraft of that size. We can, but we have to do it at the right price. We should be able to sell it, etc. So we can't be everywhere. We have prioritized our efforts on this range of 6,000 nautical mile aircraft, the 7X and the 8X, and now we are strengthening our range in the 5,000 nautical miles. We've gone from the 5,000 to 5,500 NMs with the new engines, and this is where we've reached. We're thinking about the future, but we will let you know very soon where we will put our future, where we will focus on in the future. Sorry. I'm sorry, there's a question made off mic. The answer is I don't think so. And in any case, it wasn't done. That was the answer of Mr. Trappier.
Hello, I'm from Reuters news agency. I'm just wondering about the German government. They've adopted a firm stance on exports of weapons, especially to Saudi Arabia, that created problems with the British on the Typhoon. Now, does that lead you to have particular thoughts on this? Are you concerned about the FCAS and where it's going? Have you an agreement on the exportability of this kind of air system? What do you think about this? Well, the answer, firstly, exports, it's the arena of states, not of companies. They're the ones who make the decisions. We monitor closely, of course, what goes on in terms of export markets. The export of combat aircraft is part of the business model of a company, of course. We've always lived thanks to exports as well, of our Mirages, our Rafales now. So we look very attentively at what goes on there. Rafales are French authorizations, and if it's a cooperation program, you've got to ask for the authorization, or, there must be rules set down between the states. It's up to the states to agree on that kind of thing. Now, obviously, if we really launch a Franco-German fighter aircraft, we're only at the preliminary study stage, the export rules must be defined as early on as possible. Exports must meet the needs. If it's Franco-German, Franco-Spanish, or German, whatever, 2 or 3 countries might be involved, and the states concerned must agree on the ground rules. The rule of the game was called the Brest-Schmidt rule between France and Germany. I think we should be inspired by that, and some people are working on that. And we also have to take account of public opinion in this kind of export venture. So the governments and the parliaments are the ones who work together so as to come up with answers to your question. For the exporting of Typhoons to Saudi Arabia, well, you can guess what I think about that.
Oui, Karin Finkelstein.
Karin Finkelstein from Wirtschaftswoche. I would like to go into the details on this question put by my colleague. You said that we would need to draw inspiration from the Brest-Schmidt agreement, but for years now, this agreement has been interpreted in different ways on each side of the Rhine River. And you also talked about the public opinion that we must take into consideration. And the public opinion is going to look at the possibilities of being able to export defense material in countries where they would not really like us to export such material. So the public opinion in Germany is the more restrictive than the French public. So what ideas do you have to come out of this complicated situation? Well, I'd like to maintain what I said. It belongs to the states to agree. There are discussions underway. They've been discussing for a while now. I think the discussions are progressing. The 2 states want to have a strategic autonomy, and having a strategic autonomy, that means having an export capacity. We have to take into account a certain number of criteria for exports. I trust the Germans. When you look at the figures, the Germans export a lot of arms. So that means that there are possibilities so long as the German industry is interested, and then there are countries where there might be restrictions. That's part of the authorizations that are given or not, as in France. France does not provide the right to export to all the countries. So we need to harmonize things between the countries. There's also an economic interest to export. All that should be put into the balance. And the public opinion, well, first, the country has to be a country that should be a friend for the export of Rafales. We have strategic agreements with the countries, and it creates jobs because in the country in France, you have job creations thanks to these exports. So therefore, we have to take all of that into account, and that is why the states decide to authorize to export or not.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur.
Good morning, Mr. Trappier. I'm from Exxon. I have 3 questions. The first one has to do with the sequencing of the Rafale deliveries. there'll be an upswing 26 aircraft in 2019, but the backlog hasn't changed. So I'm just wondering about that. Will we not see a substantial drop then in 2020, maybe 15 or 16 aircraft, or 2021? Is that the right way to look at this? Second question has to do with the comments that you make in your press release on the drivers to improve the margin in 2018. You mentioned in particular the improvement of the situation on the pre-owned aircraft market. Now, has there been a change there? You're making profits now on the sale of pre-owned aircraft. Has there been a change? And the third question has to do with the Falcon, the business jet market in general in North America. Could you give us, please, your feelings about the impact there's been the tax reform in the U.S. and what will be the impact of that? Do you think that the 2020 elections would be a factor for uncertainty? That, there might be some change in the megatrends on the market there as a result of that. Well, the Rafale, the guidance is 26. And we've anticipated, of course, beforehand this second part of the sequence on Rafale. So we're capable of delivering the 26 airplanes. Apart from the increase in the actual scheduling that we rolled out some time ago already, as soon as we got the third Indian export contract, we started to pace up So if you do the sums well, you'll see that we've delivered 23 to Egypt, 96 export aircraft yet to be delivered, 96 minus 26 minus 23. You get the right figures. That is remaining to be delivered after 2019, the sum that you will find and you'll see in the guidance next year. And France will take over then as of 2022 for the delivery of the 28 aircraft in the fourth batch. And we hope a fifth batch that will come in after the delivery of the fourth batch. So that hasn't yet been totally, wrapped up in terms of how it's all going to be sequenced. We are responsive. We can remain at 2, or we can go up if there are certain export contracts that come in. We can go up. We can go down a bit if we need to as well. We're fairly flexible that way. If we need to deliver more or less aircraft, we're flexible in the company the whole time. We can adjust, and we have subcontractors too that are flexible. We can adjust, and we can anticipate 2 or 3 years ahead of time. And that's what we tend to do the whole time, actually. The next question was about the pre-owned aircraft market. We've actually released all of our stocks, all of our inventories. Sometimes when we sell an airplane, we have a pre-owned aircraft that comes to us, that we purchase. Thanks to the improvement of the market in 2018, mainly for pre-owned aircraft, we actually managed to sell off a certain number of pre-owned aircraft. So we still have some that we can rent to clients whilst they're waiting for their new aircraft to come off the production line. But we've more or less done away with the inventories we'd built up in previous years of pre-owned aircraft. Now, profitability is a more complicated thing to look into because you purchase at a certain, they were sold at a certain price, you buy them back at a certain price and so on, and then you sell them off again. It's not a lot of money you make in that kind of activity. So the third point was to do with, I'm trying to read my notes, he says. The United States. Okay, yeah, of course. Falcons in the U.S. Yeah, the United States for a start. If you look at their economy, it's going well, isn't it? We should have no qualms about that. The tax reform was difficult. The birthing of it was difficult, but it's a good thing for U.S. industry, not so good for European industry. The taxation rate has gone down 21% plus the original tax. So it's 23%, let's say, compared with France. We're talking about, well, depending on the years, the coming years too, it's, much more. It's a bit more anyway. So good news for the U.S. companies. We've availed of some of this thanks to our little rock plant. Anyway, stop sidetracking on that. So there's momentum. There are dynamics in the U.S. Now, these dynamics were reflected indeed in a market that was more active in the United States on Falcons, business jets in general. Now, having said that, we hope this year to have a bit more sales, but we do feel that it's kind of leveling off. And the uncertainties I was talking about at the start of the press conference are there too. Will there be global growth or not? Will the trade war between the U.S. and China really affect or not global trade? we feel there are uncertainties there. And you add a further one, which is the U.S. elections, coming up every 4 years. That's what happens. So we're moving towards the next set of elections. I'm not certain it'll have an impact any more than the uncertainties on growth. The strong crises that have led to what we've seen in 2008 and 2009, all of that leads people to be prudent, cautious in terms of investments and so on, including in the US. So our sales, as I said earlier, we've increased the pace of production for Falcon so as to be able to factor in this increase in the market that was visible, perceptible, especially in 2018, but we remain cautious going forward. We're a company that is usually prudent, and we haven't opened the valves to productionize in a hugely increased way. So we'll see. We'll keep on looking at how things evolve month in, month out in terms of sales.
I have two questions. The first, you confirm that you've stopped industrial work with the British on the FCAS, which was launched in 2014. Can you tell us about your future prospects with the Rafale export prospects? Yeah, with the British, we haven't completely stopped. We have kept a few communication lines for the small studies, but the major project that was to fly a combat drone demonstrator, well, that was stopped. So I do confirm that it was stopped. It might start again one day. We can never tell about the future. We are trying. It's a difficult business, but that has been stopped. A few lines have been preserved, just to tell ourselves that in the framework of the treaty, Lancaster House, France will keep a certain number of studies in this area. The British wanted to launch a project, not an identical one to what we're doing with the Germans, but it arrived just after our announcements between Airbus and Dassault to work together. So, and with the British, there isn't much happening right now. As for the Rafale prospect, I won't say much. We are focusing to deliver the aircraft we've already sold. I have already asserted and said it very loudly and clearly that for us today, India is a target in the right way. We should take this word in the right way, because 36 aircraft, that is just a beginning. There's some major needs in India. Rafale is a very good aircraft. It was chosen by the Indian Air Force. We are trying to be present in India with plants that are being built right now. So we are working to build a long-term relationship with the Indians. We already have long relations, and there's going to be a development of Dassault's industrial capacity in India. And as for the other prospect, well, we're working on that. We've already announced that we have answered the bids in Switzerland. We are also working with the Finnish. They have said that they wanted to acquire combat aircraft. You know that these topics, I mean, for Finland, it's highly political. The evaluation of the capacity of the neighbors. And so we're working hand in hand with the state services, with diplomacy, with the politicians, so that we can meet these calls for tender. And there are some other possibilities, other prospects we are working on.
I'd like to know, please. You're very optimistic about the FCAS, and I'd like to know a bit more about that. The two chiefs of staff, German and French, have met and have put together a whole program fact sheet. For an outside observer, it looks like a Swiss Army knife, in military aviation. Because if I read this document, it says to come to terms with future challenges, to act autonomously, independently, or within a system, to be versatile or flexible in use, to meet all of the mission requirements, air, sea, and so on, etc., etc. And, to be operable and European, well, to be stealthy, obviously, and to be navalizable, it says. You can have maritime applications. And in the newspapers, they say that they're freeing up 65 million over 2 years with the two countries. If I do the sums properly, you're going to be able to put into this project immediately for 5 engineers. Now, why are you so optimistic about all this is my question, really. Some laughter. Okay. Oh, this is going to be a huge disconnect here in Dassault and a huge breakthrough, maybe. No, we're optimistic. It's part of our DNA. We're really optimists here in the Dassault company. On a more serious note, we know, what we're capable of. What you said, we can do. I mean, we're not presumptuous about this. Rafale, does a lot of what you mentioned already, working in the European coalition, working within NATO, does air, ground to air, aircraft carriers. We don't say we can do things if we can't do them. No. We don't say we can do things just because we're optimistic. We say it because we can do them. So Rafale can do a lot of those things already. And thanks to the inputs, through the Neuron program, with all of our even small teams working on this in Dassault, we can do great things, but sometimes with just small teams. And I keep on saying this. This should be studied in the schools of engineering, unlike what the Americans do. They make airplanes with huge numbers of people. When I say a lot, I mean a lot more than what we use. So basically, we cost much less than others in terms of the development work, the effort put in, the efficiency of it all at the end of the day. So, sometimes in France, we forget that. They don't do the real benchmarks that you should do. The Rafale costs less than an F-35, for example. And I'm saying this in front of experts here that often mentioned us in this regard. It's a huge difference, And we can do more because we can do air that F-35 doesn't do. F-35 has other qualities, maybe. For the moment, it has lots of problems too. So we're optimistic on the basis of our skills, our competencies. And, you've got to fuel your skills. You've got to reskill, upskill. If you don't roll out a demonstrator quickly, your skills get eroded. That's why we rolled out the Neuron demonstrator in 2003. Well, the decision was taken in 2003 with signatures development, and it's still flying, and it's teaching us lots of things still, especially in stealthiness. So this stealthiness and our know-how with the Rafale, and also fueled by our skills as industrial integrator and architect for the whole systems, well, all of that taken together means that we can be leader of a European team. Now, it's not as easy to do things as a twosome as opposed to doing things alone. And threesome, it's even more complicated. But it's indeed a strong ambition, yeah. The states want it to be done. We're at the service of our states. That's the Ministry of Defense. If tells us to do this way, and that's what we do. So if you want to have a chance of succeeding, though, you've got to be organized. You've got to be organized. That means you've got to have strong leadership. For France, I was appointed leader of this project for the two countries. So we need strong responsibility on the French side. And then at the same time, we're proposing strong responsibility for industry, and the strong responsibility for industry for the FCAS in the context of the combat aircraft. It's Dassault that can shoulder that responsibility.
I would like to ask a few subsidiary questions if nobody else wants to take the floor. So 3 small topics. China, you also mentioned in your announcement that the business jet situation in China was not as good as what was planned. Can you tell us about the drivers, about this slowdown? The second topic is on the Brexit. And once again, we already talked about the military topics, but not really about the civilian topics. The customer base in the UK What about that market segment? And the third topic is the group's digital transformation and the impact on the future Falcon program. You explained, as other industrial companies in your sector, that your digital transformation would allow you to develop instruments that will be cheaper to produce. And would you think they'll be cheaper to develop also? So 3 major programs to develop. The Brexit, very quickly, as for the Brexit, it is an industrial issue. It is a political issue, but I'm not going to talk about that because that's none of my business. But the entire aeronautical sector and the defense department in Europe, as well as our British friends, believe that the Brexit is a bad thing for the industrialists on each side of the channel. So we are all organizing ourselves so that we can face this with all the uncertainties surrounding this mysterious hard Brexit, with some problems that are difficult to solve. That is, how will the customs behave? We're not the customs, so will they block? Will they let everybody pass through? Will they receive instructions, etc.? In the aeronautical field, we worked with the European Agency for the labeling of the parts manufactured in the UK and assembled in the European aircraft. So the British companies can obtain at this stage the clearance to do that, so long as they make a request. So we're making sure about that with our suppliers, but that will not suffice. There will be impacts which will go beyond just regulations. There will be standardization issues in the future, economic issues. It will definitely create a psychological shock, so it will weigh on the economy and on the currencies. So therefore, all kinds of consequences that we cannot predict today. From the point of view of business aircraft, business jets, the businessmen in London will keep working from London, or they will operate from elsewhere, and they will still need jets. So I don't see too many impacts there. There might be some indirect impacts because of the economic consequences, because if the economy doesn't do that well, the business jet market will not do that well either. So that's what we can fear. The other 2 topics, China, a small disappointment in China. When I say small, this is proportional to what we expected from a great country like China. They are developing very strongly economically, but they're not calling on business jets at this stage. They still have to work on upgrading their airports, the air traffic, etc. We believe in that. We have strengthened our capacity to support our aircraft in China. So we are getting ready for that, but we have to be very patient before we see any development of business jets in China. Asia, excluding China, is developing quite significantly. So we are in Asia. We're not only in China, in Asia, and it is developing. China will arrive, but you know the problems we have with China right now. This is inherent to the Chinese system. So this sector is still limited, although we have some 50 Falcons flying in China. And that isn't what we were expecting. But we are pursuing our efforts. We are not demoralized about the Chinese market. We're patient. You see, with the Rafale, we've managed to sell it. So we will probably end up having a lot of aircraft in China. The third point, the digital, yes. The digital. Well, of course, we're investing in our digital tools because in any case, we don't have the choice. It's as simple as that. Who will not be digital tomorrow will disappear, whether we like it or not. So we had better like it. And we will do it so that we can win in terms of productivity, so that we can do better in the manufacturing of our aircraft. Development is not a problem. Development engineers, I mean, that's not Dassault's problem to reduce its development costs. I was saying it earlier on, with small teams, we're already very efficient in this sector. So we will try to reduce the cycles, and the digital can help us do that. If we reduce our cycles, we'll reduce our development costs. But the objective number one is to improve performance, quality, and costs, to cut the costs of our aircraft under production. It's not just Dassault, it's Dassault and our supply chain. We depend on our supply chains, and we will have continuity in our company with our external partners. And this is why we're very happy to have Dassault Systèmes that is helping us with our tools and with our partners, our subcontractors in the future combat aircraft, etc., Airbus, etc. That is absolutely fundamental. So yes, we're doing it with this ambition to do better in the future in all the areas you've mentioned.
If 57 Marine Rafales were to be sold to India, would it include two-seater Marine Rafales? Well, that's a long-standing debate for the French Navy. For fleets that are so small, the usefulness of a two-seater was up to the client to decide. We developed a single-seater Rafale. We could do a two-seater. I mean, it's possible. It's on our drawing board, so to speak. But we could supply if needed. Might cost a bit more. It would cost a bit more because, but people haven't looked for it really much. Now, the training is on the ground, and, in the end of the day, it's the pilot vis-a-vis the aircraft carrier. He's the only one in the airplane usually. Regarding the missions, well, the French Navy, in any case, hasn't utilized this kind of resource. It wasn't an operational two-seater or a training two-seater. For the Indian Navy, we're pursuing our offering on the basis of the single-seater marine ones, like we have in France, the Rafales.
In terms of business jets, you talked about the market and the prospects in the US and China. Can you tell us about your prospects in the other regions in the world? Yes, I can, but it will be very qualitative. As I already said, the market is not booming. We can't say that we will double our sales within a period of 1 year. We would like to, of course. And our friends on production would be running then. We would like to do that. But as I said, we will remain prudent because the signs in the global economy are not that fixed. In the United States, things are fine, but they are prudent. The Chinese, we don't really know, but they are more than prudent. They're not buying too much. And in the middle, we have a large continent that is buying a lot of aircraft. That is Europe and Russia. So they are still active. But you see the economic situation in Europe. Some countries are doing well, others are not doing that well. So it is still one of the spearheads for the sale of Falcons. The Middle East is still weak. Not just for us. The Middle East is not buying too many business jets. And we are developing in Africa slowly. But here again, this will take place very slowly. So in general, it is progressing compared to the other years where we were very low. Things are progressing. We've reached a plateau. And there are signs of stabilization of the pre-owned market. We really believed in the signs, and the pre-owned market is doing well. We've increased our sales, and the pre-owned market is stagnating now. So we've reached a plateau. Does that mean that the new aircraft market will reach a plateau? That's the question that all the manufacturers are wondering. Just as our friends on the other side of the Atlantic, they're also wondering about the same thing.
Bonjour, Stéphane Baranski.
Hello, I'm from Aerospatium. Stefan Bransky. I have a small point I'd like to address that came up in your presentation, Space Rider. It'll be on the table for the ministers to talk about it at the time of the ESA conference at the end of the year. It's been dominated by the Italians up to now, Space Rider. Would you like to increase the French contribution in Space Rider? Well, this is a program that comprises the Italians, and we're very happy about that. We've already worked with them with the XV, for example, and went very well. The Italians are active. They're intent. They have strong intentions in that area, so we're pursuing this avenue. The ESA has picked up this topic. As you say, it will come up at the conference in October, November. So we do hope that we'll see a launch of that project. And our skills in that area, I think, are worth taking into account. There's a small space vehicle that should be able to come back, can do some experiments in orbit and so on. And we think that our skills, our competencies, in a space aircraft like that could be useful for Europe. So it's a possibility, yeah. We've offered our services to other people working in other areas too. It's an opportunity for us to recall, as I recalled at the conference in Brussels a month ago, speaking to all the European authorities, the Commission, the Parliament, and the industrialists, that Europe should indeed bolster the work it does in space, and it can be done only at European level, because the efforts in the area of space are huge. When you come to put them in, and the United States have been doing a lot, and it's very hard for us to rival with them. And they're reacting to the huge efforts China is putting into space, and not forgetting the Russians, who continue to entertain ambitions in terms of space activities, and they're skilled to do it. If Europe doesn't get itself organized, it won't work. So there can be some dissension, some lack of unity, rather, in Europe. You've the Italians, you've got the French, you've got the Germans, you've got the ESA, the European Commission. These are all different entities that should have some kind of meeting on the minds to do something together if they want to. And, we've got to, they may have different opinions. So hopefully this conference later on in the year at European level will give a new impetus to the construction of space efforts here in Europe. And we would hope to be part of the picture on our own scale.
Bonjour,
Bruno Trevili, Les Echos. I have two questions, if you don't mind. First, on the FCAS, and the next step, Le Bourget. Does that mean that you are online with your Airbus partner on the definition of the various roles? Have the differences been settled? And in a totally different area, what do you think about the reinforcement of Boeing and Spirit to the Ariane? So as for the FCAS, yes, we have reached an agreement with Airbus, right down to the bolts of the aircraft that we will build in 2014. No, not yet. And we will have to integrate. We haven't reached there. We'll have to integrate other countries. We'll have to integrate the entire industrial fabric in France and Germany in the coming years. So this is just the beginning of a great adventure with a certain number of uncertainties in these areas. What is sure is that we know our skills, I recall them, and we will use our skills so that this project might succeed. We have this will with Airbus. Airbus believes that they have skills in the field of systems, and they will have to partner with others to succeed also. So this is the very beginning of the building of this large FCAS system, where we have ambitions on the future combat air system. So today we're online, and we said a year ago in Berlin, we talk to each other every week, and we are always in contact. Of course, there are thousands of small problems, but all these problems aren't always problems between Dassault and Airbus, because there aren't many. There are states, there are other partners involved, etc. So Dassault and Airbus, we have to manage all these topics, and this is what we do together in a very coordinated way. As for the supersonic and Ariane, I see that Ariane is changing partners or is getting new partners quite regularly. So all the great ones, Lockheed, Boeing, Airbus. And Dassault is not there. I confirm that Dassault is not there. Now, more seriously, what is the problem with the supersonic? It's always the same one. It's the standards. Since the Concorde aircraft, the standards have changed. And on this side of the Atlantic, and around the world in general, the Boeing control standards, the emissions of carbon, all these regulations are very restrictive. And so today, we don't want, on this side of the Atlantic, to develop a supersonic aircraft, because, of course, it'll be more noisy. I mean, you can always remove the boom. There are technologies that are being developed. I'll talk about this at another point, but it is still more noisy. If you've heard a Concorde when it takes off, it is more noisy as a supersonic aircraft. And a supersonic aircraft consumes more than a conventional aircraft. And as I said in my presentation, we're working so as to build aircraft that so that we meet certain environmental requests. This is what we've done with our engine manufacturers. We're trying to reduce, besides the noise at the airports, and that is everyday work. We want to reduce our consumption so that we consume less, and so that we have this political will. And so today, launch a supersonic aircraft that will cost a lot in terms of development, not only for the aircraft, but for the engines too, for a number of clients that will be under pressure. I'm especially talking about business men and women. And here we were talking about the population. We were talking about the populations, and I'm not sure that the business plan will be very credible. But we have to note that on the other side of the Atlantic, for Mr. Trump's America, there is a will to say the environment doesn't matter. We will consume more, we will pollute more, we will make more noise, but it doesn't matter. We will still do it. So they want to go into this development and change the environmental standards so that they can accept supersonic aircraft. So according to the OACI, but it's not only us, the aviation sector, but it's the public authorities, the countries. We're all following this environment, which does not comply with what has been done at the Paris conference. So it's a political issue once again. We provide our specialists, our talent, to find out how the standards are going to change at the International Civil Aviation Agency. So we are launching demonstrators. We're making demonstrations. We're putting money at the NASA. They're not supporting the civilian. They're only supporting the military. But they're doing it through certain agencies, and they're really supporting their aeronautical sector. So we're prudent. If we were to build a supersonic aircraft, they are dreaming of building one, and Dassault has the competences to build a supersonic aircraft. But what is the business plan?
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but in the United States, it seems to me that the supersonic business jets, that's, some startups, about 10 startups in Silicon Valley that were addressing that, just a few tens of people working in them. If you look at the design drawings of those airplanes, they don't really, they're not worth their salt. What about the engines? There are no engines, really. They're just mock-ups and nothing more than mock-ups. It's not really very much in earnest. They live on slim budgets, so I think those startups are more there to suck in budgets than as opposed to being serious companies to make a supersonic business aircraft. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the impression I have. Well, the thing is, says Mr. Trappier, unfortunately, that's not true anymore. It was true a few years ago, but for the last 2 or 3 years, we've got to be a bit more cautious in what we say on that score. There are bigger agencies giving money. NASA is giving money, for example. It's not the same thing anymore. It's not just tens of people in a corner, in their own little corner. There have been some businessmen, fairly wealthy ones, that have been putting money on the table for the development of supersonic aircraft. But you also have the U.S. powers that be that are prepared to change standards and put money into development, and therefore large U.S. companies now, Boeing and Lockheed, Gulfstream, that are interested in this too, with an engine maker. So I would say it's not zero risk anymore that America might develop a supersonic aircraft, and it wouldn't be just a business aircraft; it could also be a commercial aircraft. These topics come up in discussions with our friends in Airbus, to try and understand what's going on over there. And that's why we've been monitoring this very closely, the way in which the standards trend in the International Civil Aviation Organization. If the Americans get the standards, make the standards change, they must be for a reason. Now, what you say was true a few years ago, but we're a bit more cautious. We wouldn't say that anymore. But for us, there's no business plan right now that would enable us to say we'd put money on the table, $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion for this kind of thing to make a supersonic business jet and then sell 15 or 20 of them. I mean, imagine the price of that aircraft. And if the business environment doesn't make it possible, or if the airports in Europe also won't take those aircraft, what do you do? So we would prefer to rely on future development that's underway.
Oui, ben justement.
Yes, well, talking about the risks, I am wondering about what would be the greatest risk to contradict, to go against all the convictions that we share, mostly in Europe, that we shouldn't have more noise, more CO2, and so on and so forth? Or would the risk be greater to give up a business in the United States? It's not a question of giving up because we haven't even started. But if the situation is such, well, we have a few things in our pipeline. We've always dreamt of developing a supersonic aircraft. But to go from the pipeline to reality, well, we need a few things. But you're not saying no. You're not saying no, we're not going to do it. But we need to make sure that such an ambition would be successful. So we have to be prudent on the market analysis. Yes, there are some clients who say, well, you can do Paris-Tokyo 3 times faster. I mean, in order to build a supersonic aircraft that would go from Paris to Tokyo, it's not the same thing as a supersonic aircraft that would do 4,000 or 5,000 nautical miles. So people want smaller aircraft, but you need more space inside. So here we haven't really looked at what it would be like to launch a supersonic aircraft. But you're not saying no. You're not saying no categorically, because that would go against European convictions. We're not saying no. We see that things are happening. We're saying no precisely today. We're not going to put money into developing a supersonic aircraft. That is the situation as it stands today.
Well, if everybody has asked all their questions, thank you very much to everybody for coming. And don't forget the Paris Air Show this year. Thank you.